Jennifer, a Haunted Library production. Before I start the story tonight, I would like to say that nothing in this story is indicative as to how you should view people with schizophrenia, bipolar, and multiple personality disorder. It's simply just the story of a guy telling his point of view and what happened. I'm not an expert at this. I've always been infatuated with mental disorders, schizophrenia and bipolar, and depression. I have read enough textbooks on it to tell you that most schizophrenics are not violent. I don't want this story to give anybody the wrong impression or rub anybody wrong, because once again, this is not indicative of those people that suffer from those unfortunate illnesses. Having said that, let's get on with this. Some of the strongest memories I have of my sister when we were growing up that has stuck with me was waking up from her screaming. But one night in particular stands out. It was 2 a.m. when the scream jarred me awake. I sat up in bed, wiping my eyes, realizing it was Aubrey again. It wasn't the first time that Aubrey had screamed out in the house. She had been having nightmares and was plagued with night terrors and bad dreams since she was 7. While still half asleep, I opened my door and walked down the small hall to my sister's room. At the time, she was 8 and I was 11. I could see that her door was closed and the light to her room was on. Now, I had made this trip to her room many times in the last few years, but nothing was as weird as this night. I opened the door and was surprised to see both of my parents comforting her as she stood by the window. Usually, I would just open her door and walk in to see her sleeping or crying, and I would calm her down before returning to bed. But this time, her shriek had woke our parents. She had torn down the blinds to the window, which were on the ground near her feet. I'll never forget the chills I got as I quietly stood there and stared. Aubrey was just standing there, looking out the window. You never really know how creepy a window is until it's bare and there's darkness beyond that glass. Most of the times, our windows are covered up with blinds or drapes or curtains. It's very seldom that we look out a dark, black, bare window. My father and mom both had a hand on her shoulder, encouraging her to go back to bed and telling her everything was going to be okay. I just stood there, my mouth wide open, wondering if Aubrey was sleepwalking. But I soon realized she was wide awake. In a trance-like voice, she kept calling out, "Jennifer, Jennifer." And I didn't know who Jennifer was, and I figured she was just having a bad nightmare again. I was just a young kid confused by what I was seeing, hoping my sister was all right. My mom finally turned around and gave me one of those looks that told me she was not happy I was up. That night was also the first time that I began to realize that something was really wrong with my sister, because the look my mother gave me was not just an expression of like, "What are you doing up?" It was more of a, "You shouldn't be seeing this right now" type of look. I closed the door and walked back to my bedroom. I was too young to understand what mental health was, too young to understand what schizophrenia was, or multiple personality disorders, or delusions, or even something much more sinister. At the time, my sister was already beginning to exhibit the precursors of all these mental disorders. I'm 20 now, and Aubrey is almost 17. Over the last 3 years, I have come to learn a lot of her mental disorders. She's already been diagnosed as schizophrenic, which carries with it delusions and hallucinations. But she has an extra symptom that not every schizophrenic has: psychotic tendencies. There's no explanation where her mental disorder comes from, considering schizophrenia is hereditary and no one in our family has a history of mental disorders. She was simply unlucky, it seems. The past year, however, her condition has worsened. Despite being treated with multiple antipsychotic and psychiatric drugs, she had to be put into homeschooling and barely interacts with the outside world at all. And that's on her medications. Off her medications? Oh, that's a complete nightmare. It's gotten so bad that I have threatened to move out of the house as of lately, and I'm not financially stable enough to do that. But living with Aubrey has become quite the challenge, and her antics have taken a toll on our friendship as brother and sister. First of all, she's a beautiful girl, and for her age, she looks like she's 18. She's also just as mature as any 18-year-old girl I've ever met, and just as smart. maybe even smarter than your typical 18-year-old girl. She's my parents' baby, and she is the youngest, and she's considered very special in their eyes. But here lately, something very disturbing has been happening with Aubrey. She seems to have made a new friend, perhaps the only real friend she's ever made. Jennifer Snooky is a girl who moved into the house next door this past year. It all started with Jennifer seeing Aubrey outside walking the block one day. I guess Jennifer could sense that something was not right with my sister and had went outside to greet her and introduce herself. Awkwardly, my sister shook her hand and they began to talk. I had watched from our porch, and it actually warmed my heart that somebody had shown enough patience and thoughtfulness to talk to Aubrey, which I knew wasn't easy. Aubrey didn't take to most people, but she immediately took to Jennifer. Jennifer was everything Aubrey ever wanted to be. She was gorgeous, successful at an early age, and mature. And last but not least, Jennifer was normal. She had no mental conditions, not even depression. And these days it seems like every girl has depression. Not to put that on just women alone. Well, anyways, Jennifer was 21 and managed a Dillard's department store at our local town mall. She had earned a 2-year degree in retail and had landed the job, which for her age was unheard of. One thing my sister would always tell me when we had long talks in the dark of her room, or just when we would walk down the road after sunset, is that she wanted to be normal and have a normal job. She was always bitter at God for cursing her with schizophrenia. I would reassure her that at least she was pretty and that she was alive, and that she needed to work with what the good Lord gave her. But that was also easy for me to say since I wasn't in her place. That day would be the beginning of a long-lasting friendship between them, however, at least for the next year. Gradually, Aubrey's spirit had lifted. Jennifer came over every day to hang out with her, and my parents were never happier. Of course, this didn't stop the delusions and hallucinations. Over time, this took a toll on their friendship. I could literally tell how Aubrey's mood swings and rude behavior around Jennifer was beginning to turn her off. My parents had apologized to Jennifer time and time again in private, and Jennifer was smart enough to understand that it wasn't Aubrey's fault. But the fact was, it was all becoming too stressful. Jennifer was not only working full-time at a demanding job at such a ripe age, she was now attending school part-time to obtain her bachelor's degree in business. As time went on, it got to the point where Jennifer would stop coming over to visit us altogether. My parents and me did our best to try to tell Aubrey this was because Jennifer was so busy, which wasn't entirely a lie. But Aubrey knew better. She was smart. She too had apologized to Jennifer multiple times in the past 6 months over tantrums and paranoid accusations. Though she was smart for her age, she was still immature and lost when it came to making friends, and her mental demons were damning. Well, that's about when things really started to get ugly. Aubrey would spend more and more time at her bedroom window, mostly standing there, staring at Jennifer's window, which was just across the yard. She became obsessed with Jennifer's whereabouts. It all got to the point that it was extremely sad and embarrassing for our family, considering Jennifer used to be a main fixture in my sister's happiness. One night Aubrey knocked on my door, very late, like 3 a.m. She told me that she knew that Jennifer was going to be coming into our life. That was why she would have nightmares and stare out of her window in the dark of the night, sometimes for hours. And sometimes she wouldn't scream out. She would just wake up in a trance-like state and stare through the blinds until the sun came up. Then I remembered when I was younger, she had called out the name Jennifer that one night. I dismissed the thought as purely coincidental. I sat back down on the bed and she stood at my door, talking softly, telling me how Jennifer was the only friend that she'd ever had and that she didn't feel like living without her. I had already had 100 talks with her concerning her behavior around Jennifer. She would get upset with Jennifer if she had something wrong. She would get upset with Jennifer if she said something wrong, taking it too personal, or if Jennifer didn't come over at a certain time or call her every night. Sometimes Jennifer just served as Aubrey's punching bag for being literally out of her mind, and it wasn't fair. At this point, I was not only half asleep, I was extremely frustrated as I sat there and listened. I told her she should appreciate the fact that she had her family that stuck by her side through all her manic and psychotic episodes, and that family should be first. But she had always felt like we were against her secretly. The voices in her head would tell her this. They would convince her of this, and other terrible things that were not true. This hadn't been the first time that she had spoken of not wanting to live or hinting at suicide. Well, we got into an argument, which was usually the way things turned out when I tried to reason with her. It ended with her going back to her room for the night and me going back to sleep. And when I woke the next day, Aubrey was officially no longer my sister, or at least she was never quite the same. Her obsession over Jennifer had come to a head. Jennifer had left some clothes over at the house the last time she'd spent the night, which had been a few months ago. Well, that afternoon when Aubrey came out of her room, she was dressed in Jennifer's dress that Jennifer sometimes wore for church. The white satin dress was similar to those that you'd see women wear in the 60s and 70s. My parents ordered Aubrey to take it off because they knew it wasn't healthy. Soon that summer, Jennifer and I entered into a relationship, if that's what you want to call it. We had to keep it secretive. I had always liked Jennifer since I seen her, and she had always liked me, but my sister took up most of her attention, which didn't bother me at all. It wasn't easy keeping this from Aubrey, because Jennifer was avoiding her now at all costs. The last interaction between the two of them had been very hostile. Well, somehow, I think Aubrey could sense when I snuck out to see Jennifer, or where I was when I'd be gone all night, or just certain times of the day when I'd leave to go next door. I can remember sometimes looking through Jennifer's window, barely pulling the blinds apart, and seeing my sister's gaze from her window. She was my flesh and blood, but the sight sent chills through me. This was about the time I started locking my bedroom door at night. I no longer trusted Aubrey. As summer progressed into fall, Aubrey continued to struggle with her obsession of Jennifer. The psychotherapy sessions didn't help much, and a new cocktail of drugs were introduced, but it was clear that she was struggling with an unhealthy infatuation that no drug could fix, kind of like a bad heartbreak. Depression meds can fix depression, but they can't truly fix sadness from heartbreak. They can make you feel numb, and if feeling numb is fixing a broken heart, then so be it. But I personally think that there's a fine line between sadness from a heartbreak and outright depression. My sister was not only suffering from an obsession, she was suffering from heartbreak, the devastating loss of her one and only friend, and she knew it was her own fault. We've all been there before. It had been a pill too big for her disturbed mind to swallow. It was all we could do to keep Aubrey away from next door. It got to the point to where Aubrey was stalking her, and this made it harder for me to romantically see Jennifer. It was completely embarrassing for myself and my family, but Jennifer was very patient with all of us. I think she probably had learned a lesson, though, to not get too close to a disturbed individual too fast until you learn how they're going to react to you in their life. Well, I finally moved out in the beginning of October into a one-bedroom apartment down the road. I couldn't deal with Aubrey anymore, and our relationship was no longer near the same as it was years before. I encouraged my mom and dad to try and admit her into a mental facility for the insane, but they refused. She hadn't committed a crime to be put into such a facility, and in the state of Pennsylvania, you have to commit a violent crime or attempt suicide to be held in a mental facility against your will. Even though Jennifer was no longer speaking to Aubrey, it didn't deter Aubrey's obsession. Aubrey had no sense of pride or dignity. Unlike most girls who would walk away and move on when they knew another female no longer wanted to be their friend, Aubrey refused to do this. She refused to walk away with her head held high. Her brain kept her from this, blocking out her pride, blocking out her dignity and self-respect. She was, in every sense, delusional. All of this was going on while I began to grow real feelings for Jennifer, and she felt the same about me. The relationship had improved since I had moved out. She felt horrible and guilty for no longer talking to Aubrey, but we both agreed it was for the best. On Halloween night, we planned a date night, and I was going to meet her downtown at a beer pub. From there, we had planned on going to a haunted house, then back to my place to watch some horror movies. When 7 o'clock came and went and she didn't show up or answer my calls, I had no choice but to go to her house, hoping my sister wouldn't see me pulling up. The sun was almost down when I pulled up to Jennifer's house. I was surprised to see her car in the driveway. Her parents appeared to be out. She must have fallen asleep. I knocked on the door for 10 straight minutes. I didn't get no answer. I began to get suspicious. I walked around the side of the house to knock on her window. I was really hoping that my sister was not standing in her window. I glanced to Aubrey's window as I walked by. Her blinds were pulled, and there she was, standing in the window, with the most hollow, lifeless expression I have ever seen her wear. A chill went down my back. I watched her as I passed. Her eyes didn't follow me. She was fixated on Jennifer's window. She was completely catatonic. Her mouth was slightly open. I kept walking to the back of the house. I was going to knock on the back door since my cover was already blown. As I rounded the corner, the fading sunlight allowed me to see the silhouette of Jennifer hanging from the large oak tree in the backyard. Her body was limp, and she was turning with the sway of the wind. Her eyes and facial expression were filled with a fear I could never explain to you. I ran to her, but the rope was too high for me to untie or cut from the large branch she was hanging from. My heartbeat thumped out of my chest. I felt nauseous and sick to my stomach. I raced to my car and got my phone, calling 911, then rushed to my parents' house and unlocked the door, not bothering to wait for my parents to answer me pounding it down. I went straight for the garage when I got in and got the wire cutters. My parents stood in the doorway, wondering what the commotion was about. I gave the operator my address as I opened the garage door and sprinted around the house. I glanced at Aubrey's window as I ran by. She was still motionless. Same spot, same facial expression. I dropped the phone when I got to Jennifer's dangling body. I stood on my tiptoes and I cut the rope. She flopped down on the ground before I could catch her. I grabbed my phone and began talking to the operator, telling them we needed an ambulance. Just a few minutes later, police and ambulance rounded the corner. My parents came around back. You can imagine the hysteria and panic and tears. I sat there in my own backyard and held the only girl I had ever begun to love and watched her take her last breath in my arms. It's been a whole year since Aubrey murdered my sister. To this day, police are not entirely sure how Aubrey hoisted Jennifer up on the branch, but Aubrey did admit to the murder and it was proved through fingerprints. My mom has been in and out of a mental facility since and is now on her own cocktail of anxiety and post-traumatic stress drugs. My father is not the same man he was, but he's all my mom has left. As for me, I'm still bitter with my parents. I warned them to institutionalize her, but they didn't even try. I still have nightmares, weekly. I too am on drugs now I never thought I'd be on. Our family has been destroyed, and so is Jennifer's family. Prosecutors and the judge recommended that Aubrey be institutionalized in a mental hospital for the criminally insane for life instead of state prison. I have visited my sister only once since that night. I have mixed emotions. Part of me hates her, part of me feels bad for her, and part of me misses her. I just left Jennifer's grave, a place I visit once a week without fail. My parents have been asking me to visit my sister, so today I am finally giving in again, only for the second time. I walk in Present Day Health's Women's Psychiatric Center and check in at the front desk. I make the long walk down a dim-lit hall on the first floor. At the end of the hallway, I knock on room 42, the only room on the first floor with a window. Just like the last time I had visited, there's no answer. I finally open the door and go in the room. My sister is facing the window, standing, staring out. She's clearly catatonic, as she stands as stone as a statue. I can see that she is wearing one of Jennifer's old dresses. Her hair is fixed the exact way Jennifer wore hers, and she has even colored it, matching Jennifer's deep auburn color. Since her and Jennifer were the same size and height, I could have swore from the back it was Jennifer standing there. This had gotten worse since the last time I had visited. Without turning, and in a voice that sounds nearly identical to Jennifer's, she asked me to play the music box on the bed. A cold chill goes through my body. I realize that it's the same music box that Jennifer's grandmother had given her. Somehow Aubrey had gotten a hold of it. Tears well up in my eyes as I go over and crank the music box. Aubrey turns and looks at me with lifeless, empty eyes. But she's no longer Aubrey. She is in every sense the persona of Jennifer. She is wearing the same lipstick that Jennifer used, and her eyebrows are trimmed the same way too. Her makeup is completely identical.
Have you spoke to Aubrey?
No. No, I haven't.
I really miss her.
Yeah. Me too. I miss her too.